when I was at NQ4I, I was surprised that so many people who were excellent contesters weren't aware of some of the features that are available in their login programs that could help improve rate a little bit. So that's how I got digging into N1MM. We used WriteLog there, and started looking at some of the different features that would help me give a technological advantage to catch up to these people who have much better stations than I am and are generally better operators when it comes to operating. When I first started talking about giving this presentation, it was suggested that there's a lot of people that are fairly new to N1MM or fairly new to contesting in general. So it was asked if I could do a little bit about some of the features about N1MM's macros. So that's pretty much where I started focusing, or what are some of the things in N1MM that could help some of the newer contesters, or even, as I mentioned in the prelude here, that some old dogs, maybe there's a new trick here or there you can pick up too. But if you're familiar with N1MM, I'm not sure how much you're going to get out of this, but it's good to have some review as we go through these different things. So let me share this screen and get things set up here. N1MM macros and useful features by yours truly. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize, I told you I'm into this complicated type of stuff, but the more complicated you make things, of course, the more problems you can have with your station. So as you go digging into this, it's kind of a good idea to keep in mind what you did, because when Mr. Murphy comes along, you got to figure out how to undo what you did to get back on the air a little bit. This is the N1MM entry window screen. I'm going to start out pretty basic here. Please bear with me through that. And we all know that pretty much, but a lot of the old timers know to have this little cheat aid at the top of the keyboard. I prefer, instead of a strip that most people do, I went to Hobby Lobby, bought some little Avery stickers, and I color code them for what I typically do. The white is my information exchange. Pink is the question mark that I have for the most part. Green is for things that are positive and I'm done, etc. So these first ones don't normally change. That's a fairly common type of thing. And then I'll peel and replace these as needed for how I feel like setting up for the contest at any particular time. In the configurer, you can reassign. The CQ key is normally F1. You can reassign them. Oh, it says my interconnect is unstable. I hope I don't pop out. If you do, somebody wave your hand or whatnot. You can change these, but it's probably not a good idea to do that, because some of the things you can download from the internet to set up your function key messages are assuming that you haven't changed it. And also, you get used to things. Good contesters, everything's second nature. You don't have to think about what F key to push or whatever. So keeping it the same all the time is a very positive feature to help make that continue to be second nature to you. And if you go to some other person's station and operate, or a multi or something, or you remote into some place, they're probably going to have it set up this way too. So it's a good idea to keep them always the same. While we're here, this little thing right here about CW contest word spacing, I unchecked that from when I took this screenshot. And the reason why, I think it was Pete N4ZR, the RBN guru, mentioned that one of the problems in the RBN that's contributing to busted spots is speed changes. And the algorithms for the RBN assumes in the most normal things that you've got a normal word spacing, not an abbreviated CW contest word spacing, which is a little bit shorter. And they think that that's contributing to some of the busted spots. So if you've got that checked, you might want to consider unchecking that. For the function key macros, we see this on our screen, but if you right click on that, or you can go through one of these menus, right click on it, you can open it up and you see these things here. In case you don't really have much idea about any of this, F1 is a function key, of course. This is a label that goes there. Then anything after the comma is what the actual macro or FKey message will be. I use the terms interchangeably. Please bear with me. But these commands that are in brackets are actually the macro. The rest of it's just kind of like a function key message. This clear writ. If you use writ at all, which is very useful if you're running to try and change the frequency for receive, it's a good idea to put that clear writ in your CQ to reset it. I also put it in the thank you to reset it. And I have a CQ alternate, and I also put it in there. So that's a good idea to have that type of thing. But these are standard macros just typed out as to what I wanted to send. In this case, it's CW. But you can also set up some of these things in here, like my call. We'll go into how you set up your station, and whatever call you put in there, it'll bring that in. So if you've got one of these function key message files for a contest, and then you change my call, you don't have to change your FKey message. It'll just automatically pull it out. And of course, you got other things. My call, this exclamation point sends what his call is, whatever you got in the entry window, etc. So those things work that way. One of the things on an entry window, if you're a new contester, you're probably not using this, but you got that orange key. N1MM uses something called ender sends message if you want to get used to it. And I think it's a very good aid for making through. Some of the older folks don't like it. But what that means is if I hit enter key right now, it'll send whatever message is highlighted in orange. So on that particular screen, if I hit enter, I'd start a CQ. You can mess yourself up. It takes a little, it took me about 3 or 4 contests to get used to it. But in the middle of it, you can hit escape and stop if you hit the wrong key and then go on from there. But the enter sends message, I'd like to give a little demonstration of it just a minute. If I can back out of this and bring up N1MM. And which one did I want for this? NAQP. Let me open that file up just a minute. This is the CQWPX open login database. Get rid of him. Open login database. That's not the one I wanted. I got 2 of them in here from when I was piddling. So let's take the other one. There we go. All right. The way this works for enter sends message is if I type in a call like, I don't know, K4TYU, as soon as I type it in, I'm going to play these 2 particular messages. Let computer and I just play it. So I was for TYU and it automatically plays this change message. And one for my wave message. In this case, let's say his name is Stan and he's in Virginia. And once I get those 2 fields filled in, this automatically changes to thanks and ready to log it. And it goes in from there. And now you're ready for a CQ message for that. So that's how enter send messages work. And you can go through this again. K3ALC. Again, it's ready to send those 2 messages. I hit the space bar and it tabs over where I could hit enter. We're ready to go. So it makes it easy. You don't have to type quite so much. And if you have this set up so that it has a call history file, if it finds K3LC, these 2 would be filled in, ready to go. So all I would have to do would be to hit enter, bring me over to here. Those 2 would be filled in. I'd verify that the information hadn't changed to center state, and then it'd go off from there. So enter sends message is a pretty good useful feature for making it happen. And if you make a mistake, all you gotta do is escape And also while we're here, you can just hit it yourself, even though that says the next thing to go is my call sign, WJ4X is call I was using for this particular contest. If I wanted to say again, I could just click on that or hit F8, and it doesn't matter what's highlighted. I can still send whatever the heck I want to send. So that's a good little feature to have as well. In enter sends message, you can turn it on and off if it bothers you just by hitting Control M. While you're there, the semicolon will send the call in the exchange, the equals will send the last message, or Alt Enter. You can log without sending anything, because that used to trip me up a lot. Have that enter send messages. I'd make the correction after doing so, and if I was just to let enter send message continue to go and hit enter, it'll start transmitting. So to keep it silent, you can just hit Alt Enter, and it'll go ahead through there. By the way, as we're going through these, I'm not dwelling particularly on every little nuance of these. The way I do it myself, and I kind of encourage you all to do, is if something trips your trigger, jot it down and explore it a little bit more in questions later on, or feel free now, or you can check it out as time goes on as you move across things. So we're not teaching everything. PJ2T, most everybody knows that call. I got this off their website. This is some examples of what they use for setting up their macros. And there's an awful lot of things you can do with this. Part of the thing about making N1MM work with its 800-page manual is knowing what's available. So we're going to talk about a few of those types of things. These are the run messages that are in here, and there are 12 of them. Let me get this laser pointer back. 12 of them, and there are also 12 search and pounce messages. We'll talk about accessing them in a minute. But in these particular ones, if you look at this is kind of an interesting thing, vary message. That's actually the macro. And then you got to identify it. The common mistake is to not use a 1 there and not put an and at the end. But what that says, this is the first vary message. It'll say, go ahead and send CQ test N4XL, CQ test N4XL, CQ test N4XL, and on the third time, instead of playing this message, it'll go and play this one, test N4XL, N4XL test, and then it'll start back again and play the CQ test my call. That seems kind of useless, but one, if you're listening to it drone on, it breaks up the monotony for you a little bit. And this is a very subjective call on my part, but I found that a casual contester, more often it's a casual contester, for some reason, when it changes the type of CQ that's being used, I'll get a casual contester to call after the change. I guess he says, well, there must be somebody there after all, instead of a robot just sending out, blasting out CQs over and over. So I generally keep this in my toolbox and use that for my way of calling CQ. And again, those are the two errors that you do. If you can't get it to work, check to make sure you've got an and, check to make sure you got a number in there. Down here is another one, message 2. They're using different variables and different counters. And in this case, all that does is it says, thank you. And then on the third time, it says, thank you, N4XL. Please do that if you're a runner. I know there's a lot of dispute about that type of thing, but some of the contests want you to say they can penalize you if you don't put your call in fairly frequently. And it does help out the search and pounce people that are coming along rather than sitting there and waiting 3 or 4 minutes for you to throw your call in. This will do it for you automatically if you put a varied message in there. PJ2T and their search and pounce messages. Remember I said F1 through F5 are all the same? They make their F6 be again. But this down here is kind of an interesting type situation. And what they do is they set it up, even though these are for running type people, the runners to access, it's in the search and pounce message field, and the runner can access these instead of pushing F7 while they're in run mode. You can hit, I think it's Control F7, and it'll play this message, even though it's in the search and Pounce FKey message files. So what does all this stuff do? Again, this is just letting you know there are a bunch of things out there, and if you wish N1MM did look at the 3 pages macro, let this message go away. I've never had that unstable internet in several months, so I'm not sure what's doing this. I hope I'm still coming through okay. But in this one, of course, P160 is what the FKey message is labeled, and then you've got this exclamation and all that stuff. What this will do is the exclamation will send, if you're running and you need this guy, you want to pass him to 160, you hit Control F7, and it'll send AA3B, please QSY, and then this pass 1800 with a network computer, it'll go out and it'll find what station is networked is on 160 meters, and it'll transmit that frequency to AA3B, who I said it started, and tell them please QSY to the frequency of the run station that's on 160 meters. And at the same time, what it'll do is it'll open up in the interstation chat message to the 160 meter op, and it'll pass the AA3B. I'm passing them to you, and it'll give, according to the manual, I haven't done this, it'll give the information, the exchange information for AA3B to the 160 meter op. So all that happens just by pushing Control F7 when you're doing a run. Of course, they got them set up for each one of these things. A friend of mine here in South Carolina shared this example with me. And what he uses is these little arrow keys to speed up. And you've probably heard it when you're contesting. Somebody will blast 5NN at you at like 50 words a minute. And that's what this does. It speeds it up, sends 5NN from where you normally were on your CW speed, and then it slows it back down to send the exchange. And he also does the same, slows it down and sends SC to make it easier to get. And I don't know, Joe, you were talking about people messing you up with your N3 HEE, confusing it with SEE. Maybe you could program a function key to slow it down specifically for the H so that people pay attention a little bit. You know, there's another little trick in here too, to something to think about. So he's got that going on. And this one down here at the bottom, I'm not a RIDI operator or the other, but you can click on the calls, I understand, in the RIDI operation and fill up 4 or 5 calls, and so you can work stations. And what this does is after you work somebody, it may say this exclamation is the other station's call. When you complete a contact with PJ2T, it'll go out and grab the next person in that stack, which you've clicked on and populated that stack. It'll say PJ2T, thank you. Now K4BAI, which is thank you now, and F5 is where the other guy's call is, and F2 is the exchange, K4BAI 599 Georgia, and then it'll switch back to receive. So you can do that type of thing with this as well. Here's a macro key, FKey thing I used for the South Carolina QSO party when I was WJ4X. And we'll look at each one of these as we go through. Right here, most of your audio files, that's what this is, WW4SF wave. It's an audio recording of my call. Go into your wave files folder on N1MM. But I went ahead with this. I've been experimenting, trying to find out the best way I like it. At this particular time, I had set up a folder underneath Wave called QSO Party for South Carolina. And I put my WW4SF files in there for the QSO Party. So I'd always know where to find them for that particular contest. So that's what this does. It displays the call on my entry window. And then when I hit it, it goes to the subdirectory under Wave, and it pulls out that particular Wave file. Again, I've got a very message thing up here that we just got done talking about a minute with the clear RIT. And this one's kind of interesting. The same night as the South Carolina QSO party is also I think it's the ARL 160. And if you go up there and you call CQ on 160 meters, you're going to get a bunch of people who are not in the South Carolina QSO party answering you, even though you say CQ the South Carolina QSO party. So to make it easier for them, I went ahead and changed, instead of just 59 Greenwood, which is my exchange for the QSO party here in South Carolina, I added 59 South Carolina because that's what the 160 meter folk wanted. And then if they were in the South Carolina QSO party, they need to know what county, so I put that in the end. And I gave them both the same number. And if you put a pound sign in front of the number, it means don't execute that when I push F2. It's a read only. But when I switch up to 160, all I got to do is right click on the FKey things in the entry window, delete that pound sign, put a pound sign there, and just like that, which I can do it in the time it takes to complete a CQ, I've changed my exchange message. So sometimes I'll pre-populate these FKeys with different things so I can quickly shift if I decide to do it in the middle of a contest. F5, I've got a blank. You've got to maintain a number structure even if I'm not using a WAV file or an FKey message in there. If I don't, N1MM doesn't read that this is an F5 key. It just counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I were to delete that, just go from F4 to F6, it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'd think this is my F5 message. So always make sure you've got F1 through F12 when you're setting up these FKeys, or you get your numbers out of sequence. Down here, N1MM can record on the fly, so you can make up a message however you want it to be, and it'll record it for you and create it in a WAV file in whatever FKey you want it to go into. But to make that work, you've got to have a WAV file underneath that particular function key. I could record over the top of again, I could record over the top of call, an on the fly message. But if I wanted to do it for F10, I just label mine F10, which clues me that there's nothing particular there and it's open for whatever I want to do. And then I just create a file and put a few seconds of silence in there initially, or just copy one of these over and rename it to F10. And when I record something on the fly, it'll just record right over the top of it. But you got to have a WAV file underneath that. You can also combine files together. So this one would play F7, then it would play F8. And also, I like to have, and just about everybody I know does, a wipe one. That's always, F12 is always my wipe, so I can clean out all the entry window with a single push button. So if I have something in there and I don't make the contact, I just hit F12 and boom, it's gone. You're not locked into using WAV files on your computer. Just about every radio these days has a ability to record messages on the inside of your radio. And my friend who shared these to me, he's got a TS590 like I do, and there are 4 voice messages in there. And push button 1 is his test and his call. He's not that, by the way. The other is the exchange. He says 59N, then he voices the serial number. Then you got thanks and just his call sign. And those are the ones you really need to help out. But how do you go about accessing them in N1MM? And you do that, there's an ASCII computer control code, or there's a hex one also. Cat A1 is for radio 1, send it an ASCII command to do something. In this case, to play the message in PB1. Or in radio 2, if he's working on that radio, play the message that's on PB2. And a couple interesting things about that is that for SO2R, it's not necessary to change and tell this specifically to activate radio 2. For some reason, I think it's the way that N1MM sends its push-to-talk codes to radios. It will probably send both those commands, but because N1MM says For example, if you've got radio 2 being your focus radio, the only radio that'll play anything or do anything is radio 2. So you don't have to specify things back and forth if you're doing SO2R for that part of it. And one of the bigger problems that people have is they don't like accessing those things in their radio, because once it starts, it's all in turn to the radio. If you hit escape in N1MM, the radio just keeps on playing away the CQ message. He programmed in there a cat command for his radio to stop playing whatever message was active, and he set that up under his F11. And if you're interested in doing that, every radio has its own set of ASCII codes. You'll have to dig out what that what the code structure is for your radio. PB0 probably doesn't apply to your radio unless you've got a Kenwood 890 or 590 or something along those lines. But you got to figure out what those codes are for your radio, and then you can go ahead and plug them in. He also does some of these other contests. N1MM can go out and grab the current time off of your computer for dump it in there automatically for you. And here's an example of where he wanted to make sure his call stood out. So he told it whenever I plus F4, send an enter, my call, his call, then enter again to give a couple double line feeds for clarity. Here are some of the things you can use in the function keys. Asterisk is the call, your call, same thing as my call. The exclamation point is whatever you've got entered in the entry window call field for him. An ampersand voices the current receive frequency. A number sign will send the serial number, excuse me, the exchange for the contest, not just the serial number, whatever the exchange is. You can also go out there and read the other frequency for the non-active radio, and you could use that, for example, or other frequency round to ask the guy if you want a QSY to 14, or if the guy says yes, then you can go ahead and send another frequency round, and it'll read down exactly to the kilohertz of where you are, and tell them exactly where to go. Of course, these, we talked about them a minute ago. And Joe, I read this for somebody who's been, I think they had a V's and 5s and 6s and E's confused. So in between the characters that were giving people problem, this sends a half space character. So it's good to use for a fill to put a little pause to emphasize whatever character people are having troubles with. Here's some of the other macro commands that are out there, and this is not all by any stretch of the means. I just pulled some out that I thought I might use one day. I've got a list of them. Call sends the other guy's call. Grid and grid square will go ahead and send that stuff up. Again, the other frequencies, radios, you can have it send QTCs for you. What the left radio frequency is, the right radio frequency is, stereo on off, so you can set this thing up for almost SO2R operation without an external SO2R box. I know people that are doing that. The name is entered in the entry window, so you can try to verify the person's name. If you think you might have copied it wrong, you could have something. Name is Stan or something. Other megahertz sends a frequency to the other radio. Jump your receive focus, or both receive and transmit focus if you're doing SO2R. This control function key, if you're in run and you hit control F7, it'll send the search and pounce F7 message, or if you're in search and pounce and you hit control F7, it'll send the run message. QSY CQ will bring you back to the last focus radio CQ's frequency, and other things, clear, receive, transmit. So like I said, there are 3 pages of these things. Go through them and get an idea of what's in there, and maybe it'll open up some ideas for you. You could even use macro, and I've heard people doing this. For example, if you're working split, listening CQ contest N4XL, listening this frequency in 7053, for example, have it read automatically. That way, if you got to move your listening frequency down split frequency, it'll just automatically read it, so you don't have to go in and change your macro. In the configurer, you've got a couple slots here to change If you hit an up and down arrow on your keyboard, it'll move your transmit frequency up and down, or if you're in RIT, it'll move the RIT frequency up and down by whatever amount is set up inside of these. I've left this one alone, but I found 0.1 works best for me. And if you've got to move a lot, if you pop the key like pop, 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 it would move that 3 different increments on the up down arrow. So it's a quick way to get somebody slightly off frequency, or if you got a massive pile up, to get off to the edge of it real quick so you can move things around. Since I do that all the time, that's why I have clear RIT. When I'm running, I usually keep the RIT on, so then I can just, somebody's a little off frequency or in a big pile up, I just hit the up down arrow and try to bring them in a little bit better so I can hear. And the other thing over here, if you use page up and page down when you're sending CW, that's how the word per minute changes. It'll happen. Sometimes I'll be cruising along at 27 words a minute, 28 words a minute, like was being talked about. Joe, I think, was talking about. That's we usually CQs there now. But if somebody calls me at 20, I'll hit that page down key like 3 or 4 times real quick, and it'll just instantly drop it back down to the same speed, so the guy can copy the QSO information better. And then once I get done with him, I can just hit page back up and go back up to my speed. This is what the band map looks like with your different frequency. Everybody knows that. Just as a comment, if you're unsure sometimes if you're lower sideband or upper sideband, which way it goes, and you don't want to get close to the band edge, that black tells you which way it is, so you don't get out of band from there. But these buttons right here are all programmable. I think there used to be just 4, but they've changed it, I don't know, 9 months ago, a year, something like that. They've got like 32 or 36 of them now. And you can make these be whatever you want. And you can click on them. And in this case, if I was to click on it, it would change my CW filter to 80. But I've also got some other things set up on the inside of there too. You can click on them. I hate using the mouse, and Joe turned me on to this touch portal program. I heard so many people talking about it that I went ahead and got one, and I've been playing with it lately and still getting it set up. But you can set these things up for touch portal to just push a button on an Android or tablet or something off to the side, so you don't have to reach up and click. You just push a button on your little touch screen off to the side, and it'll program the buttons to actuate these things, so you don't have to reach up and do any of that. All the commands can be put in the inside of there. And I found out each one of these things for Radio 1 and Radio 2 has its own buttons. I didn't know that. I set it up on one screen. I'm still playing with it. But this is how you set it up to turn my receive antenna on or off. Receive antenna for Radio 1 on, a little bar in there, receive 1 off, and that switches back and forth as you do it. And just by clicking on that button, it sends the ASCII code to the radio to do those different functions. Change my filters, 80, 200, 400. Those are the ones I use all the time. And you might say, well, I go ahead and I can just reach over on the radio and hit wide and narrow, but that's only 2. Every now and then I find that it's useful to have those 3 particular bandwidths to whatever situation I'm in. That way I don't have to try and fiddle with a knob on the radio. The attenuator and the preamp. You can do anything in here that has a code for it. And you can actuate FKeys and stuff in there too. So those are very versatile things to have, especially combined with a touch portal on the outside. Wave file playback. We talked about this a couple meetings back. And I said you can do a few things to make it sound more natural. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, how to make it sound natural. And some people do really, really good. Mine, you can tell it's a voice message, but if you work at it, I've heard a couple that you really got to think, boy, was that a recording? It sounded real good, but it depends how much time you spend with it. But the recording should sound the same as the live microphone. They shouldn't be any different tonal quality or anything. So what I typically do is I've got a W2 IHY external unit. I run it through the equalizer external and then use a transmitter monitor to record the audio files on the computer. So it actually is what goes to the radio. And that's how it ought to be. It ought to be just like a live microphone. So there's no change, very much change at all in how it sounds, whether you're doing an audio recording or not. And that helps the other station maintain focus in poor conditions. The extreme example is somebody, some XYL calling CQ or some YL calling CQ, and then all of a sudden some deep male voice answers, and you go, well, was that the same station? You know, I want it to all be the same thing. Audacity is a great program. There are others out there. I'm not associated with them, but it wouldn't matter anyway. It's free. Just go out there and grab it. It does some things like trim the silence at the start and stop of recordings, which you can't do if you've got using the voice messages inside of your radio. It can remove pauses in the middle of recording, because sometimes you put them pauses in there and you don't like them, so you can get rid of them. It can amplify soft spots or reduce the peaks. Another thing that I was surprised people hadn't thought of, and they all know that there's a big problem with it, is if you sit and you record a message like a CQ contest, and then you get all that all set up, and then you go ahead and say the exchange, and where the CQ contest was at this volume, the next time it might be 5-9 South Carolina. And those things, if you start trying to play files together while you're in a contest, it's very distracting. Not to mention you can cause distortions or stuff, or maybe not have enough power. So Normalize makes them all the same reference level. Audacity also has a thing about identifying mitigating clipping, although I've got mixed results with that. And I screwed up the other day when I was recording messages for a new contest, and I had some of them at 8,000 hertz and some of them at 44,000 hertz. And rather than go back and record everything, I went online. The internet's great for that. And there's a way you can batch process. I hauled up all the ones that were at 44,000 hertz and batch change them all to 8,000 hertz, so they'd all be the same. We'll talk about why that is in a minute. One mistake I made when I first started doing this, I told you I went through my transmit monitor. I would have the compressor on the radio, so the audio went into the radio, and it would be compressed through the radio and come out compressed in the transmit monitor into a wave file. Then I'd go ahead and play the wave file back through an FKey, and the compressor on the radio would still be on, so to get a double compression. And that's not a good thing to do. So be thinking about your audio stream path for that. This is something I like to do. If you say 1 and you record that wave file, you're good. And the next time you say 2, you might have an entirely different volume or tone to it. What works for me is I'd record all the numbers at the same time. I don't do the letters, although this process, I'm sure it can be done exactly the same. I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, and I do them all at the same time, and then I'll pull out the individual number and paste it into a new wave file and then save it as the individual number. But I also found that when you get saying a number and you get to the end, you use an unconscious tone to your voice to tell the other person that you're done with that number. So if you say 1, 2, 3, and then you play that back, you would hear 1, 2, 3. You'd be thinking each time that it was done. So I count through. I don't just stop at 0 like I did a minute ago. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 11. And count through it. So subconsciously, I don't put that tone in my voice that says, hey, I'm done with this particular number. And that way, when you combine them later, it makes them go a little bit smoother. Number and letter wave files go in the letter files folder. You can create subfolders underneath that, like I said before. And in fact, if you've got many operators sharing your station, it's good to have each person record their own numbers and letters, and you can have subdirectories under there with their call sign. And then when you sit down at the radio, you do op on and you type in your call, And then when you play the numbers and letters, you have N1MM play the stuff through the function keys. It'll pull your particular wave file out from underneath there. And best to use the same audio format types for all files. The reason for that is, remember back in we were talking about the individual macros. I'd said you could play an F7 and an F8 in the same thing, or an F5 and an F2 within the same F key. If those are, we're going to talk about something called Concatenate in a minute. If you have that option selected, it grabs all the wave files that are in an F key and it preloads them so that they're all ready to play at once. But if one of your wave files that it's grabbing and preloading is at 8,000 hertz and another one's at 44,000 hertz, it says, I can't change the format in the middle of playing this stuff back all at the same time, and it'll throw up an error. So just to avoid that, it's best to put them all in the same format all the time. Here's the screenshot of Audacity. This is the wave file for N4XL. And you can do batch process or do the entire file. This is all light colored right here. It's all selected. Or you can just grab the mouse and click and drag across it and get something that, this I said was 8,000 hertz I talked about. And it gives just a small section. And then you can modify just that individual section if you want. Up here at the top, they have a thing called Effect. I typically use that. If you click on that, there's like 25 or so different options you can do. I don't use auto duck. I'm not sure what that is, but I don't want to sound like a duck. You can change the tempo or speed. Ones I typically use is to amplify or reduce, to normalize, which makes all the wave files be the same value. I found that -8 dB works well for me. So when I play them back through the audio stream through my SO2R box or whatever, all the individual files come out at the same volume. So it makes adjustment easy. And I also use clip fix, although again, it gives me mixed results. If I see clipping, I'll usually just record over the top and not let the program fix it. This is an example of what it looks like when you record a wave file for the number 1 in this case. In an unedited, there's a little bit of gap up there. In this case, it's not too much, but it really drags out at the end. You can trim it and make it be much shorter because you don't need all that information. And if you have too much of a gap between like number 1, 2, 4, that just doesn't sound right when you're doing contesting, and it really throw people off. So I trim it, get rid of that particular information, and then you can cut these too close and lose some of the meaning of the number. So don't go too close for that part of it. And then normalize it. Here is the raw recording, the initial recording. You can see in regards to the 0.5. And then when I normalize it to -8 dB, it takes what the peak is of the wave file, and in this case, it raised it up. So that's what normalization does. It amplifies the entire audio string. Now, if you've got recording an audio string and part of it's loud and then another part's soft, and you normalize it, it's going to grab that loudest part and normalize it, and it's not going to do a thing for the rest of that quieter audio. You got two ways around that. One is to re-record your message. Another is to grab the quiet portion and amplify it, bring it back up a few dB. And it's a trial and error, but you can balance it out quite a bit from there. Here's a number 3 when I recorded that. And for some reason, look up here at this particular thing. When it first started, I got a real sharp peak on that. Oops, wrong way. I got a real sharp peak on that. So what I did is I grabbed this here, just took and click and dragged across just that peak, and I reduced that by about 6 or 8 dB, and I ended up getting a much lower value on that. It didn't affect the rest of it. That's the type of thing that can cause your amplifiers, solid state amplifiers, to trip off as well, seeing that type of thing, and then normalized it. In N1MM, they've got a separate section on the configure page for audio setup and monitor. And if you go to the monitor page, you've got this little checkbox that says Concatenate. I already explained it goes out and grabs all the wave files at the same time. And what that does is eliminates a lot of the spacing that occurs between numbers. Instead of going 1, 3, 5, it'll shorten it up and make it be 1, 3, 5. Bring it much closer together. So that's a nice thing to have. But again, all your wave files have to be at the same 8,000 hertz or whatever you choose to use. Because if they're not, it'll cause an error be thrown up on you. Again, changing voices in SSB can confuse people, the op-on type of deal. And that's what you would put in your FKey message, CQ operator / CQ wave. So if N4XL was logged on, it'd go to the letters and numbers folder, wave, it'd go to wave, and then it'd go to letters and folders, and then you'd have the operator thing from there. So that's how you would set that up. Some thoughts and ideas. For the longest time, using the keyboard instead of reaching up and using the paddles. I could never remember this bracket. That's what you use for AS. That information's in there too, because you can use Control K and type on the keyboard, and it'll send Morse code for you. That's not an FKey thing, or just reach up and bat the paddles. Use FKey to activate Rig CW Tune feature. You can program that type of stuff in there if you want to, or anything that the radio will do, you can put in there. And I've started using one a couple times if I've got an extra open FKey message. There's an N4XL, a K4XL, N3XL, N1XL, and N5XL now too. And I'm always getting confused and causing errors. So I listen real carefully when people say what the call sign is back to me. And since it happens so often that it's a mess, I just program an FKey to send either my prefix or my suffix, or rather than just the whole call to make that more useful. So I sometimes do that, but not all the time. In the setup program for the contest, sometimes people says send exchange. You got 5NN and then our zone is 5. People put 5NN space 5 in there. But if you do that, the Cabrillo file that gets generated would throw in 5NN space 5 into the exchange field that it generates, and instead of just the number. So that'll mess your Cabrillo program up. So just put, everybody assumes 5NN, so don't even bother to put that in there. Put that in the FKey message thing, not in this particular portion. And if you want, instead of 5NN in your FKey, you can use SendRST or SendRST cut. We talked a little bit about these caret things. It'll speed it up and it'll slow it down. That's the type of thing where you would use that type of information. And it sounds like a good idea for speeding things up. And sometimes people do that. They'll throw CQ contest, N4XL, and then that final test at the end, they'll send it at like 45 words a minute or something like that by speeding up like that. Well, that confuses the RBN algorithm. So it's not a good idea to throw these things in there and have speed changes if you want to have accurate spots for you. Make sure you get spotted correctly. So that's why I don't normally do that anymore. And that was from Pete N4ZR. And I made a mistake one time. I had like 3 or 4 of them here and 1 less on the other side. So it kept speeding up and it wouldn't slow down to the same speed when I sped it up. It took me a while to figure that one out. So if you start using them, make sure you got the same number on each side. Any questions so far before I go on? Okay, as a newbie, it took me probably, 5 or 6 years of using N1MM before I finally began to appreciate just how much information is in this entry window. I don't have to spend a lot of time looking over and distracting myself from the screen. I can just look at this, to look over at the radio or somewhere else. I can just look at this screen. So what type of information am I talking about that's on there? Well, here you've got what the frequency is, what radio is being used, and what your RIT status is, and what VFO is on that particular radio at that time. All that information is right there for one. Here you typed in HQ9, and I haven't completed this, but what's going on here, generate that little question mark is as you start typing something in there, if you've got it activated for SuperCheck Partial, it's looking at whatever you type in there in real time and comparing it to a database of people who have been in contests for the last couple of years. And it has not found a match to HQ9 in that list of active contesters for the last couple of years. So it says question mark. And that if you had like HQ9B and there was a question mark there, and you weren't quite sure if you had copied the call correctly, was that a B or was it a D? Because he was going 45 words a minute. You might question that particular character. And we'll look at that a little bit later on. The next thing was, here's a screen where OE2S is a valid call. And it said, yep, that was a valid call. Doesn't mean you copied it correctly and you got the right call. It's just a backup to let you know that, hey, that is an active valid call for somebody who's been in contest for the last couple of years. So it's an added insurance mechanism or feel good to you that you very well might have that call correctly. This little portion right here, the red means you need that multiplier on those bands. The blue means that you don't need the multiplier on 20 meters, but you haven't worked OE2S on 20 meters, so you need him there too. And that gives you an idea. Do you want to help try to pass him or move him to another frequency? Down here in this section, it tells you what your beam heading is, what long path is if you want to switch it around, what their sunrise and sunset time is. I don't get too wrapped up in those things, but I do use that beam heading information quite a bit. And I don't have an actual thing here, but if it did a call history lookup, for example, if John K4BAI was tapped in there, it'd say John, Georgia. That information would appear in there as well. So you'd know what to expect for an exchange from whatever call you had put into that particular field. Could back up to that. Down here at the bottom, it gives you what zone they're in. Again, another check for making sure you've got the right information coming from them. This is how many Qs and mults I had for that particular contest and what my current score is. All that information available right there from the entry window. Let's let you know what your CW speed is. If you want to change it, you can either click those arrows or just hit page up and page down, and it'll cause it to go what you're running, what your search and pounce status is. And if you're SO2R, you already know what those are all about. The entry window does more than just accept call signs. Type in there USB, CW, radio, it'll change to that mode on the radio. If you want to do a quick band change, like if you're copying somebody, you tune across somebody and say they're listening on a certain frequency, you can just type in there, boom, or if they say they're moving so-and-so, or can you move to here, you just type in the frequency and your radio will change. For setting up split, Control-Enter sets a split frequency. So if you're getting ready to do split and you're on 7200 and you want to operate your receive frequency at 7050, you'd type in 7050 and hit Control-Enter and set the split frequency for you. Control-S swaps the VFOs back and forth, and Control-Alt-S turns split mode on and off. There are so many keyboard shortcuts that I created a cheat sheet. I've actually color-coded mine now instead of just leaving it black and white, grouped them together. But here are some of the things that I use on a regular basis. I put them on here. This one, a lot of people love this in the different contest groups. If it's an exchange number you don't get through the first time, which us little pistols don't, you typed in the number and you're going to try again, you just hit Control-U and it'll increment whatever number you have in the exchange field by 1. These are for using the band maps or the Molten Q windows, shortcuts to jump from spot to spot to spot. Same with the spectrum display. So it is an easy way to go to your next signal or multiplier. It will skip over the people you've already worked that'll be in gray in those particular bands, which is why it's useful to use that. You can get very high rates using these things. As long as take the time to make sure those spots are accurate when you listen to them. You don't just click on it and log it. You got to take time to make sure you've got that spot. The spot is an accurate spot, but I can get rates of 120, 130 an hour for short bursts of like 10 or 15 minutes using these things sometimes. And that really helps your score go up quite a bit. Alt Q, Control Alt Q. If you move off your CQ frequency to work somebody for a minute, that'll bring you right back. Sometimes if you use an enter send message or whatnot, or the log N1MM will tell you that whatever you entered isn't valid, but you're positive you got it correct, you can hit Control Alt Enter and it'll force it to accept that information. And again, the up down arrow will tune the rig or your RIT frequency. One thing that seems to be becoming a lost art in this days of skimmer spots is actually putting in spots yourself. Alt P will send a spot to the cluster. And on the telnet window, you can type in here a comment as to what the particular thing is. In this case, it was the California QSO party. Every spot I sent out, I'd add that comment to the spots that I'd send. Always a good thing to spot people. They appreciate it. SuperCheck Partial. I used to not use this. Ethically, I thought this was kind of cheating. But after I thought about it a little bit, I realized that my competition is using it. So I'm putting myself at a disadvantage since it is legal to use, and they're using it. So I might as well use it too. And it helps identify correct call signs. You still got to take the time to make sure that you've got the correct call sign logged, but it helps identify and make sure you got the right one. It's not the same as a call history file. We'll look at that, I think, at the same time too. And again, it uses calls that are used in the last 2 years. If you don't want your call in the SuperCheck Partial, or you find that the information's busted, the information was wrong, like I've found mine wrong a couple times. I shot a letter to Clyde, logs at supercheckpartial.com, and he'll go ahead and make sure the next generation of his SCP list will have the corrections in there. And let's take a look at the NAQP sideband just a minute. If I get out of this. Contest, North American QSO party. All right, for SuperCheck Partial, I need everything up here. Uh-oh. Where is it? I cannot run two at the same time. Bear with me just a second. Okay, let me close it and bring it back open. WJ4X is a friend of mine. I use it for the NAQPs. There it is. Don't know how it got up there. Let's bring this down here. Alrighty. The way SuperCheck Partial works is you start typing in a call, K4, and let's go with John B. As I did that, all these different things popped up. I have worked a K4BBH already in this contest. He's already grayed out. K4AB, I've worked him on this band as well. I've also worked him, and I might have it wrong. I've worked a K4AB, but he's not on this particular band. What this is saying is it's guessing what my next calls might be. The two greens mean if I keep going B, you see that there are less and less options that could be from that. The red means there is a K4BB, but maybe I've got the thing wrong. The red means maybe it was K4AB. So you can click back here and make that be an A. And then you end up, because this is a larger letter and bolded and italicized, you work that one in another particular, you work that one in this contest. So if you go over K4B, I've got all these different options that it could be, and I hit A, and it reduces down even more. And then I hit I, and that's the only one that could be. If I hit tab, ooh, I don't have that associated with this. I need call history text with this. Bear with me a minute. I need to get rid of him, so I'll hit that F12 wipe. Login database, I have this, associated files. Okay, let's try this again. K4BAI. Okay, once you get that set up, when I hit enter and moved out of it, it goes out and says, in the last contest, that was John in Georgia. So I'm ready to go ahead and fill his name or verify that he sends that name. And because I've entered send a message set up, the next thing I would do is I'm in search and Pounce. John would answer me in 4XL, John, Georgia. I would hit enter and it'd send my exchange and then log it back in search and Pounce mode. I'm ready to go again. Let's say I work Jeff KU8. Okay, now it says up there it could be any one of these, and I come up to Jeff E, and I hit space, Jeff in Georgia. Same type of thing, hit enter and go on from there. So enter sends message works for that part of it. And that's basically how it works. Your red means you might have something wrong. The green means it doesn't. But there's another feature in here too. If you do a lot of search and pounce operation, you can pick up that you get Jeff. Well, all these people could be here, and all I heard was Georgia, but I don't know his call yet. I can now come over here and see if it's one of these people. I'm ready to continue from that part. If I hear KU, there's only one possibility, and I already worked them. If you want to hear, I use the name Ken. There's only one Ken in Georgia that's for the last couple of years, or call history that's in call history. But if I get rid of that and put in South Carolina, you can see N4XL as one of the possible calls, KQ4KK. So this can be a reverse lookup situation as well. Or you could come in here and say it was South Carolina. Let's go K3D. Ed is another member over here. And then you can kind of guess what his name was. You hear a DE and go space. That's Ed in South Carolina. So that's useful for that way of doing operation as well. It's not just a straight, give me information. You can do all three of them. And where were we? Back up to here. Again, the calls, never trust spots. This has been said more than once. But here I've got on 7036, this was an actually screenshot during a contest I had, 3 different call signs on the same frequency. So you can't assume, well, which would the real one stand up? The other thing I found interesting, this pound sign means it was done by a skimmer. That's how that spot got put in. KM3T is 3T has 2 skimmers going, and each one picked up a different call sign. Interesting. Here I got excited because I had a double multiplier, but when I went to the frequency, it was one of these other guys, so I didn't have a double mult at all. If I would have just accepted, clicked on that and accepted it and logged it without listening to the call, I'd have had a penalty for having that guy claiming I worked him and I didn't. And then here are 3 completely different calls from 3 different places, all in the same frequency, same thing. You got to be careful about it. While you're on this is the Molten Q window, by the way. When you're on this, in a particular frequency, say you're on that guy's frequency right there and you work them, you can hit Alt-A or Shift-Alt-A and it'll jump up or down on the list as it goes from there. So you can use those or just click on the call sign. Another thing that happens sometimes, and they've gotten much better on this over the years, is the last character of an R, or the last thing that sent Morse code of an R, is a DIT. And a lot of times the skimmers would take that last DIT of the R and they'd put it at the very beginning of the call sign when he repeated it, K3LR, K3LR, and they'd meld them together. So instead of K3LR, you'd see a spot for EK3LR. And you can blacklist those so that you don't have to see them all the time. And once you do that, you just put their call sign in there, EK3LR, and N2IC had done this. I don't know where I got this from. It's been a long time ago. But now any spot that comes in for EK3LR will no longer be there. People were doing DX1CV, or skimmers were. One was D4 1CV. T5, I wish, during a contest. This one was interesting. YV5B was a legitimate call. He kept popping up over and over and over, but he wasn't answering to anybody, nobody. And after about the 7th or 8th time, I got rid of his call sign off it, so it didn't just block up my molten queue window. I just went ahead and blacklisted him. The problem is, next contest, if I left him in there, it'd skip right over him too. So you got to periodically review that bad packet spot call list. One of the things that most newer people don't use.
That call is a beacon. That call is an NCD. That call YV5B.
Oh, YV5B, is it?
It's a beacon for the northern, or the beacons that are at like 14100.
That's well, that would be why he wasn't answering me.
Yeah.
All righty. So the molten queue window here, most new people aren't familiar with it, but this is one of the best tools that N1MM has, as far as I'm concerned. And you can set this up to show all spots or just mults only. And you can choose what bands and modes you want to see. In this particular case, it's showing us as probably just these two, 15 and 10, 20. But there's a lot of information here for this part of it. One is where the calls are, and the red means they're multipliers for you. This right here, if you're trying to figure out whether to make band changes or not, normally there's a lot more difference. In this case, there's the same max number of multipliers available on 80 and 40. But if there was a ton of them, the one or the other, I'd probably consider moving to that one and picking up the mults. But there are more queues on 20 meters than there are the other bands. So you got to ask yourself, is this going from at night to day? And am I going to have another shot at these multipliers? Or is it daytime going to night and they're going to be there and I ought to stay on 20 and work off the rest of these types of things? So it's a good aid to try to figure out whether or not you need to change bands. Another thing, if you're not looking at the bands for spectrum scopes, just a quick glance across here, these two columns will tell you if there's a band opening popping up or not. And again, you need to be assisted to do this type of operation, but it's very useful for that to see if there's band openings popping up as well. You can sort this thing by direction. So what I'll typically do is point my beam towards like 30 degrees and use the beam width, bandwidth of the beam minus 3 dB width of the beam, and then I'll work out the stations in there, and then I'll move it another 20 or 30 degrees, and then I'll work the next stations as they go down from there. And it minimizes rotors spinning back and forth by sorting by directions. You can again filter max only, sort by directions. I also use this, by the way, for receive antenna use when I'm using, I've got K9AY loops. I don't have the real estate for a lot of beverages, but it's useful for sorting and working them that way too. And you can sort them by both directions and frequency. Another little trick I started doing, I just got a tri-bander. I don't have monobanders. And I do have automatic intensive switching, but you don't need that. Long before I started with the automatic antenna switching, the tri-bander does it for you. I would just go ahead and sort this by direction, and then I can go down and jump from call to call to call, even though they're on different bands, and it automatically takes care of it, and just keep going from that way too. So again, minimize my rotor turning that's needed. I usually keep this window open so that I can make quick changes. Is SO2R. I usually will run on one particular radio, and I will have this open and manually select this to the band for the second radio. So that way any spots that are in here are handled by the second radio and it won't cause any changes to the primary radio. And as I use those shortcut keys to jump from spot to spot. It only causes a second radio to jump. When I started doing these spots and things like that, there weren't that many people that were talking about this stuff. It's becoming kind of old hat, but one that still kind of confuses some people as I run across every now and then is the band scope in N1MM. A lot of people said they didn't like to use N1M's band scope. They preferred other programs or whatnot. But there's a heck of a lot you can do integration wise between the band scope and the N1MM program. And once we started talking about this with the people, 2 or 3 of those people changed over, even though they prefer the look of the other program. And that's the way you can use this to handle spots. Now, this is a very cluttered screen for N1MM's band scope, and you can take this and make it be vertical so that you have the little mark there and the calls stream out to the right, and it's easier to see. But I don't really care how hard this is to read, and I think after we go through this, you'll understand in a minute. This blue line right here, now you can use your mouse wheel and it'll lower or raise it up back and forth. And that's essentially think of it like a squelch line. Any signal that's above that gets considered by the program to create one of these red dots. And what the red dot means is you have not worked that particular station that's on that frequency. If you have worked a station like VE5MX here, even though it's above that blue line, VE5MX is gray, I've already worked them. There's no red dot right there. So you can move this up and down and come up with a threshold for your antenna systems, what the band conditions are, your high power, low power, what your odds of getting through, whatever works effectively for you. And it'll go look at the spots that are out there. And you can use this whether you're assisted or not. You just won't have any spots that are out there. It'll just look at it and say, okay, there's a signal there. And you can actually jump from red dot to red dot or from signal to signal as it goes from there. And then you can listen to it and say, I've already worked this particular person. But if you're assisted, this kind of combines with the molten Q window, and you can jump from mult to mult with a molten Q window, or you can actually jump from mult to mult, I think, through this with a shortcut key combination too. And it works very well for that. The band scope's open, shift up and down arrow jumps to next unworked station signal shown on the band scope. And that's pretty much all I got.